Now, the Gurkha strategy works on most normal people, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the right action is covert protection. If the neighbor gets aggressive and gets allergies when they see your pets, but for some reason they never get them if the pets are right next to them, but they don't see them. My own dad used to be like that. That if you had like horse stuff on all over you, but he didn't know about it, he'd be absolutely fine. But when he knew that there was a horse around, then he'd suddenly get these allergies. And there's a reason for that. There's actually that when people are afraid, a lot of times the muscles down here subconsciously contract, which means they really can't get any air, but it's fear. It's not actually the allergy itself. With some people, of course, it's the allergy, but with a lot of people, I think with 60, they did some research, with 60%, it's just the muscles down here. And I realized that myself because I used to have asthma. When I learned to relax these muscles, it took care of quite a lot of situations. So anyway, sometimes you find these people where you have to set boundaries. And there's just no way around it. Bullies exist. There's a reason for that.
Like different cultural norms, for example. And it really blows your mind what some people think is normal, especially if they come from a completely different kind of environment, especially a really rough environment or where they really have to be very tough. And then what is normal for them isn't normal for everybody else. I found that several times in my life where sometimes I just watched what was going on and I thought, oh my God, I would have thought they were trying to kill me. And for them, it was kind of a bit of fun. I'm giving you one example in the following video. Of course, sometimes you have warlords and psychopaths, but sometimes it is also self-inflicted. And bear with me there, I'm not blaming the victim. So this is a really interesting bit of this video. So just have an open mind and take a look. When preparing this module for the first time, I remembered a biography I had just read, and there was a story in there that opened my eyes to a lot of what had been going on in my life without me realizing it. So I used it, thinking it would help other people who grew up like me too, because it illustrated the point I wanted to make really well. Later I thought that maybe I shouldn't have, because it looks like I'm attacking that person or his family, which isn't very nice, and which wasn't my intention at all. So when revamping this module, I thought about it, but I decided to leave it in nevertheless because it does illustrate the point really well and may help people understand. And he must be okay for people to know that this happened because he published it. But I did leave out his name. So if you have read the biography, you will know what and who I am talking about, and you will know the context out of the entire book. If you haven't, then I haven't taken anything out of context for you that may give the wrong impression when separated from the book. The context here is that I was wondering why there are people who, at least in my perception, just love to bully. And no matter how nice you get, no matter how many efforts you make, they just get worse the nicer you get. Of course, if you're a halfway attractive woman and you live in a culture where people suppress positive emotions, it may be a way for a masculine man of getting the attention of a woman, kind of like pulling pigtails, which is why it is less pleasant to be attractive in some cultures than in others. But sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with that, so I was just genuinely puzzled. Why do people do what they do? And then I came across this story. It is the story of a relationship between a dad and his son.
And there's a story about it, about his dad and his older brother in there. And he tells how his older brother got the respect of his dad, and his dad was apparently was a very big man, basically, and his brother was I don't know if he was smaller or not, but anyway, for some reason they got into a fist fight and into a real physical fight, and the brother was so afraid that the dad would kill him that he would take a 2x4, like a big stick or a 4x4 or whatever, and hit him fully against the head, and the dad would be fumbling around a little bit, but then would come at him again, and he would hit him again until he basically knocked him out, and he thought he'd killed him. And for 5 minutes, the dad didn't get up, and he thought, "Oh my God, I've killed my dad." Right? And then the dad comes around again and is so proud of his little boy because his little boy stood up to him. And that's normal, or was normal in some families. I mean, I read this, I thought, what? I mean, where I grew up, there would have been social services, there would have been the police and everything. And they just thought, oh, wow, he stood up to his dad. It's like, what planet? I mean, if you grew up like me, that is just so out of this world. But some people grew up like that, and they don't respect you unless you stand up to them. You don't. They think that you're weak, and then it grates on their nerves. So you have to stand up, even if you don't feel really good. Even if you like to be nice to people, you have to stand up to them. Otherwise, they will never respect you, and they will let that out on everything around you. Be it your children, be it your pets, be it anything. So standing your ground in a non-violent way, there are different ways, obviously, to do that, and quite a lot of different groups on Earth have developed different tactics. But one of the things that is really, really necessary is certainty. If two bullies are in a room, basically, and one is more certain than the other, the one more certain wins. So you have to get that conviction into you. You have to get that certainty that you are right, that you have the right to protect your animals, that you have the right to stand your ground. And that is where the first inner strategy comes in. Because bullies smell fear and they smell uncertainty. If they get a little whiff of it, you're dead. So you have to get that certainty into you. And once you stand up to them, they will usually back down. I mean, some of them will be, there are psychopaths out there, but usually they will back down, and a lot of times they will suddenly respect you. And what I found also in situations, there was a there was a really really weird situation, but I've actually seen this a couple of times again since then. I was, England was a little bit of a difficult time for me in various ways. But I can remember there was something with a neighbor again, and I was internally already almost exploding. I'm standing in line, and that was my first aha moment with that, actually. Um, I was standing in line. It was shortly after I exploded against him, and he then suddenly didn't do anything anymore. And I was standing in line. I felt myself, becoming really upset for some reason again. And I was standing in line there, and there's this guy who starts bullying me again. And I just completely exploded, and I exploded into him and told him exactly what I thought about him, and I told him, and you may believe that now because of the way I am right now, but at that time, I was totally shy and I wasn't talking to anybody. So me exploding into that guy's face must have been a little bit to him like a rabbit suddenly, that rabbit in Monty Python, where this rabbit, people look at this rabbit, and it's such a cute rabbit, and then they turn around and the rabbit sees them and it goes, you know, that must have been his feeling a little bit. I was just going off and off and off on him, and so he shut up, and suddenly I realized, and I felt so bad about myself because where I grew up, that would be such a bad thing to do. They would just be so antisocial and nobody would talk to you anymore. But then I realized that several people in that queue turn around to me, smile at me, and try to become my friend. It was like, I went, what? What? But in some situations that actually works. I wouldn't recommend it as the first strategy, but in some situations, I mean, I would never actually recommend actually being aggressive, but sometimes standing your ground is absolutely the only strategy that will work with some people, and it will be a strategy that will give you respect and will also give other people the permission to come out again. I found that when I moved into a certain apartment, and I had learned this whole aggression and standing your ground thing at that point already. And I moved in, and they started bullying me, not about the animals, but trash and whatever. And apparently, they were doing that to several other people, and several other people had already moved out. So I stood my ground again, and quite publicly. And I realized after that that a lot of the people that I had seen before who were hiding and who were kind of, looking on the floor when I was walking past and not even saying hello, they suddenly said hello to me. They suddenly were warmer. They suddenly seemed less afraid. One of the neighbors, who was apparently a bit of an outsider before, we are friends now and stuff. So it can have a very beneficial effect because some people don't realize how much they are bullying, especially if they come from a rough neighborhood and they move in somewhere where there's a lot of, single women or something. They don't realize how aggressive they come over and how damaging that is to some people. So if you stand up to them, suddenly everybody else feels safer as well. And that was a real revelation for me because that was not what I saw as my job.
And yet it is. If you cannot protect your family, how should you be able to protect an organization? You start small. Maybe that is how I had to start small. But sometimes it has nothing to do with cultural differences either. Initially, I actually didn't want to revamp this module. I just wanted to take out and re-record half a sentence, which was supposed to be a half an hour the next day. But then, thinking about it, I went to bed, and when I woke up, I suddenly had this in my head, and I couldn't so much as have breakfast until I had written it down. So I'm glad this happened, because I was never quite happy with this module and always thought that something was missing. I just didn't know what. So I solved it by promising further content via podcast, but it still didn't sit well with me. Now I know what was missing. One of the most common scenarios that I find in this context and that I have been guilty of myself in the past. It is going into victim mode, which may then cause a situation that may actually be bullying or that may just look like bullying and feel like bullying to the victim, but which is nothing of the kind. To say this up front, this is not a module about blaming the victim. I know since my university days that there is such a thing as a victim mentality and that this can even cause victims to be attacked physically again and again. And I saw a very graphic example of that in court once during my training, but I never quite understood what caused it and what the victim was doing wrong. So I also didn't understand what I was doing wrong until I got a little bit away from that mentality myself and I saw someone else in victim mode in action. It actually only occurred to me a few days ago that this was what I was seeing. It was at an event where the speaker was trying to demonstrate a point. I had seen him demonstrate that same point over and over again, both in live events and in old videos, and it always went the same way. He did a somewhat physical demonstration with someone and then used this example as a metaphor to illustrate how the same can happen in relationships and communication. The audience members he chose usually quite enjoyed this little game and the attention because the speaker is a famous guy and few people get close to him, and it was a bit of a game with him in front of thousands of people being featured on the big screen in the room, which was pretty cool. Now, in this event, he was trying to demonstrate the same point with a woman he was trying to help, but instead of doing what she was expected to do, push back, which had been everybody else's automatic reaction, she immediately started walking backwards, so the speaker had to practically run after her to keep contact with her. He kept trying to get back on track with the demonstration while her body posture and her facial expressions turned into those of someone who was being attacked by a big guy, while he actually had to walk after her in order not to break contact and abandon her. He could have, of course, just let her go and do this demonstration with someone else, but while I don't know what he was thinking, I'm guessing he was just hoping for her to finally stop and push back a bit, so he could get on to the next bit and make his point. Plus, he was probably wondering what on earth was going on with this woman and why she acted this way, and wanted to help her, which was the whole point of the conversation. Had he just let her go and abandoned her, it would have been quite embarrassing for her in front of thousands of people. Unfortunately, the visual appearance of this short scene had the same effect that stage fighting achieves in the theater and in TV and film. Because what you do in stage fighting is that the so-called victim has the full control over the situation, but the other person looks like the perpetrator. So in the movies, what they do is they basically, if you want to choke someone, for example, right? So you are the person choking someone, you don't actually choke them, but you just put your hands on their collarbones, well away from the neck, which you can take a look at the next movie or the next TV where you see a scene like this, and sometimes it's really quite obvious how far away the hands are actually from the throat. And what the victim then does is it holds on to those hands of the perpetrator and then pretends to be choked and to be suffering, and it is the victim's job to sell this to the audience, to basically make the audience believe that they are really being choked. And all the perpetrator has to do is basically follow the movements of the victim. So if the victim sells it well, it looks like he or she is in dire danger when in reality they have the full control. In stage fighting, this is done to make sure the supposed victim is never harmed and the actors feel safe. I once did a scene for a commercial with a young kid who obviously knew the concept, and before I knew it, he was throwing himself here and there, and it looked like I was totally abusing the poor kid, although I was just desperately trying to follow his movements. Well, for some reason, him following her to keep contact and finish the demonstration, which was usually one that was done standing or sitting, seemed to scare her. So she sold the alleged abuse that seemed to be like abuse to her, like the best actor. And the effect was that the speaker was later publicly accused of actually abusing her and bullying her, and she probably thought for a while that she actually had been abused. Well, at least until she saw all those videos of all those other people, male and female, who had done the same demonstration with him for years and not felt abused at all, but quite enjoyed it. So there was no abuse whatsoever, but just a misunderstanding. The fact that he was male and much bigger than her made it all the worse in the perception of those who didn't understand what was happening. So this was a situation where her expectations of being abused, of being helpless, and being a victim actually caused the unpleasant situation, not just for her, but also for him, and blew a completely innocent demonstration completely out of proportion. I'm sure she didn't mean for this to happen. I certainly don't think she set him up deliberately. He certainly did not mean for it to come over this way either, and yet a lot of damage was done. Had this happened not in public but in a private setting, and had both people never met again, she may even believe to this day that he meant to attack or abuse her. The only reason she must have seen that this was clearly not the case is that there are dozens of older videos, some as much as 20 to 30 years old, where this demonstration went without any complication to the delight of all, including the participants in the audience who was a part of the demonstration. And when I realized that, I wondered how many times I had done the same. How many times I may have misinterpreted a situation based on a bad experience of the past, how many times I may have expected a bad outcome and just through the expectation actually made it happen. I don't know why she misinterpreted the situation so badly, but I know I have done the same in other situations. Now, the last night before redoing this module, I had also watched the last film of The Matrix, and the heroes there don't act like victims at all. And yet, they are being literally pummeled, beaten, and shot from beginning to the end of the movie. Why didn't they look like victims to me? Which got me to think, what is the difference between a victim and a hero? Is it that the hero is never beaten up and always loved? Obviously not. It's not just Keanu Reeves' character in The Matrix who gets beaten up a lot and who could feel pretty overwhelmed with ever more challenges coming his way. The hero in pretty much every movie has to overcome insurmountable odds and injustices, physical and otherwise, to get the happy end. That is what makes him a hero. And I found that what the hero does have and what the victim does not have, at least in action movies, are these 4 attributes. The hero or the heroine has some skills and strengths that the victim does not have. In other words, he or she has worked hard to get some defensive capabilities and has put years of effort into it, preparing himself or herself for the challenge mentally and physically. Second, he or she never gives up. Third, he or she fights for something bigger than themselves. It's not just woe me or an extension of woe me via other people by initiating a witch hunt, but rather than protecting themselves, they are actually ready to die for someone else in the course of what they're doing. And 4, he or she knows that they are fighting for a right cause. They know they are on the side of good. Even if they have moments of weaknesses, they are confident and know they are good at their core. And this point 4, as trite as it sounds, makes all the difference. Why? Why aren't points 1 to 3 more important? Well, points 1 to 3 are important, but this 4th point, which is quite often overlooked, is actually incredibly important, because that means the hero does not think at some level that he deserves the attack. It goes beyond loving oneself, which is so much emphasized these days. It means his focus is somewhere else. Not on himself, but on those he wants to protect. He knows it isn't personal, the situation isn't caused by him, by some flaw of him, but nevertheless he agrees to fix the situation. The situation is quite likely caused by his opponent quite often, his opponent's ego or greed or desire for power, but it isn't about blame or destroying either. Not the opponent or anybody else. It is about finding a solution at the core of it. Even if they're shooting and doing whatever, they're really looking for a positive solution. The approach is constructive, not just defensive. And this is incredibly important. Why? Because as soon as you think you're attacked because you're not good enough or kind enough or pretty enough or strong enough or something else enough, as soon as you think you as a person, as a soul, are the target, as soon as your sense of guilt is awakened, the ego wakes up, makes everything about yourself, everything about defense, and either attacks you or tries to defend itself against somebody else. The energy focuses to the inside and is generally destructive to anything coming in, and any ability to react to the actual situation in a constructive way dissipates. That's the curse of the victim mentality. The victim always thinks that she or he is somehow at fault. But another part sees the injustice and overcompensates, but at the core of it, it is all about me, but in a much less fun and self-loving way than it sounds. Because it is a very negative way that doesn't even serve even the me, producing actions that cause even more negativity, actual or imagined, to flow in. And stick with me here, this is important. Remember, this is not about blame. This is about finding a constructive way out of the dilemma and avoiding other pitfalls, because this 4th attribute also distinguishes the hero from the villain. Unlike the victim, the villain may have attained attributes 1 and 2. He may be strong, she may be strong, or he or she may never give up. He or she may even think they are acting for a cause bigger than themselves, which is attribute 3, but he or she is always acting from a sense of lack, a sense of not being good enough, with a need to defend and extend their position, their ego, the wealth, the importance in the world. They are always trying to somehow make themselves all right or keep themselves in their empire to protect themselves from disintegrating, basically. The villain from Nightfall, the Bond movie, is a perfect example. An ex-agent who was broken when he was abandoned and who ended up doing all kinds of evil things to compensate for the injustice he felt and the deep sense of his own lack and ugliness, which has even expressed itself physically. So if former victims start developing attributes 1 and 2 and tell themselves they are doing it for a higher good, say in a witch hunt, for example, they're helping other people when in reality they're just doing it for themselves. But even if they're doing it for other people and think they do, but they do not develop this point 4, they may become villains and the perpetrators themselves. They may even like it because it feels stronger than being the victim. And so they perpetuate the injustice by passing it on. Some even go so far as to pass it on to those in their care, who are more accessible and less able to fight back than the perpetrators they are afraid of. And that's when you see people abusing their children and their pets, thinking they are disciplining them, when they are actually just passing down abuse in an attempt to feel strong and in control. Even if it does not go this far, you will see a tendency to turn from victim to villain in certain movements even today. Movements which started with kindness and good in mind, but where some of its members have done immense harm since, once they felt strong and invulnerable through the power of the community. There's also another dynamic to watch. Other than the dynamic that misinterprets situations on the basis of past trauma or experience and causes a situation that looks like abuse but really isn't. And that is the situation where the sense of guilt and helplessness actually causes real abuse, because the sense of guilt and victimhood radiates and is picked up by actual abusers who are looking for someone who won't fight back, but who won't touch those who will make trouble if they're attacked. It's a principle that is even known and made use of in the animal kingdom, where some animals avoid their potential victimhood by having markings that identify them as another, more aggressive species or as poisonous, although their body contains no poison. In the example I used in the beginning of this scenario too, I talked about a judge and a court case. There was a woman who had been raped by 3 different men on 3 different occasions, while none of the other women in the area were bothered. And the judge explained to us back then that it is long known in psychology that a victim's stance can actually cause real abuse. Not just in families where certain actions like talking back to defend oneself can escalate situations, which can just be the desperate attempt to prove that, hey, I'm really not a bad person. I didn't do this. I didn't do anything wrong. What I did was good. What I did had a reason. And if you could just see, then you would still love me. Please confirm to me that I'm okay. Which of course doesn't come over that way, but instead comes over as disrespect or annoying. That's, by the way, there was an example that I saw once where there was a secretary who was actually beaten by her husband. And she was doing that all the time. And she said that is why her husband hit her. So why was she doing it? And she was doing it to us as well. Every time we just said, okay, can you do this differently? She would just explain to us why she did it this way and why this way she thought was better. And it was really rather annoying. But then if I look at this, she just really wanted to be okay. And why did she do it to her husband, although he was beating her? Because in the end, he would beat her up because he was so annoyed by it, but then he would feel sorry about it. And then he would apologize to her and take her into his arms. So in the end, she got what she wanted. She got that she was okay, although it was a very painful way to get it. But that just as an aside. But even in relationships to strangers, because what oftentimes makes someone a victim is also that the other person responds to one's own belief that there is something wrong with us, to the guilt or the sense of ugliness they can feel, which may have no basis in fact, but may simply be a remnant from some childhood experience, and the other person just goes along with it. I used to be accused of lying all the time, not because I was lying, but I expected to be accused of lying. Until I figured out that when I actually lied, which is very seldom the case, I actually almost always get away with it because my body language is different. So now when it is really important that somebody believes me, I always make sure I slip a lie in somewhere even when I have nothing to hide, to make sure my body language reflects truth. Again, this section, of course, is not meant as an accusation in the sense of this is all your fault. But it is giving those of us who have that mindset at times a way to identify it and find a way out, because it is the only way not only to protect ourselves, but also those we care for, and that is really important. I certainly found it immensely helpful to realize that I was the author of my own misery at times, because that meant I had the power to stop it. Plus, if you get to that point and it truly sinks in, you will be able to see others and interpret their actions in a totally different way. It takes the charge out of the situation, at least in relation to yourself. The hero knows within himself or herself that he is all right. He may not be perfect, he may not be able to always win, but he fights for good and to make it all right for others too, or he defends this all right against legitimate threats against himself or others. It's not about him or her, it's about something out there, which means he or she can have a somewhat objective and accurate view of what is actually going on in front of him or her, instead of getting lost in their own stuff. I felt terribly victimized at several points in my life by bullying and witch hunts. All of them were unpleasant, most of them were unfair, but what really made them so damaging to me was me. It wasn't their actions and words that made them so damaging. It was that part of me that believed their damaging judgment that I was a bad person, even when I knew that they had the facts wrong. So my ego started defending itself just to survive and alternated between victim and villain, becoming the very thing they had determined I was, which I actually hadn't been. And I ended up in danger of drowning in hatred and resentment against the person and people who had caused all that ill will against me, harming not just them and possibly some innocent people, but also me in the process. Because hatred and resentment is seriously bad for your health. Not just your mental health, it can actually cause cancer in your body. When I finally stopped before reacting to some rejections or accusations, which by the way oftentimes came from people I had never met before, and sometimes even from people I admired, I started to ask myself the following questions, and that made all the difference. Now that may be a little bit cerebral for some of you, which is why I mention other techniques in the solution slides later, but this is a way I found very helpful myself. So when I get accused or when I get witch hunted for something that where I think they're really not right, I really haven't done anything wrong, then these are the questions that I ask myself. Have their accusations and criticism any basis in the facts as I know them? If not, then do I know the facts? May I have misinterpreted something? If maybe here or there a detail, but essentially no, then if they are acting on the basis of something that isn't a fact, can I clear up that misunderstanding? Or would I hurt somebody I care about if I did so? Would somebody else hurt me if I cleared this up? And is their motive worth considering because they are protecting someone or something I also care about? And would the reactions be worse for me than just dealing with false accusations by people I may have little to do with? Can it even be an expression of love to just accept things as they are, to be accused falsely? If you don't understand why I'm saying this is, I don't know if you had brothers or sisters, but if, say you had a little brother, right? And this little brother had gotten in trouble before with your mom and your dad because he was always breaking stuff, because he was just not paying attention or just running around in the house. And then you saw that he was really, really trying, and he was just so nervous that he would do something wrong again, that he would be, because he was so nervous, because he was trying so hard, he would break something. Then you may just tell your parents that it was you, and you would take over the blame. Or if the same happened at school and he would get expelled, but you had a perfect record, you may just take over the blame for him because you know that he didn't want to do anything bad. He really tried. And he was trying to do the right thing. So you take over the blame for him. So this could be an expression of love. Then on the other end, if people got the facts right, but they are reacting to these facts on the basis of different values, and that's why they're reacting this way, then would they be able to understand that this is okay or good or right at their present stage of development? Would it even be good, okay, or right for them? An example that everybody may understand, which has nothing to do, it is in a different kind of development, is if you have an extremely busy and dangerous highway near your home and you have a 5-year-old, telling the 5-year-old to never ever cross that road is a legitimate request at that point. But if that 5-year-old still doesn't cross the road at 30 and all the jobs are on the other side, that is a problem. So it depends on the stage of development whether crossing the road is right for him or not. Also, if you tell your small children to never talk to strangers and later in life, when they are 30, they still follow that advice and they just got a job in sales, they won't have that job for very long. Even if they don't work in sales, you'll at best get an extremely tribal community. Would I have understood when I was at their present stage of development? Are they maybe further ahead of me, and should I listen? Well, if your inner guilt is crying yes, yes at this point, be aware that you may try to find something to be guilty of, so you can go back to your emotional home, which you may not like, but which is familiar. One of my mentors explains that concept in great length. One of my ex-boyfriend's sisters once told me, and they were not all that much into psychology or personal development, that the entire family thought that I was drowning in my own guilt. They had never seen anybody who was feeling guilty so quickly and all the time. There are reasons for that in my upbringing, but that's beside the point. It sure explained why I made my own life so difficult. What are the practical consequences of both value systems, theirs and mine, in the long term? Which one is actually more beneficial? Are there any references that support my position, like the Bible, holy books, spirituality, whatever you're into, Gaia, or whatever you're into? An example is one of the first things that really helped me was finding one of my favorite long forgotten passages in the Bible. It actually confirmed exactly what my position was. And I found that the same reference in a number of spiritual texts since, some of them in the Bible, in other texts, Bhagavad Gita, and all kinds of different spiritual teachings. So I can't be that wrong. It's just a certain type of teaching that doesn't necessarily fit everyone at every stage. So if you're clear about your own position and the causes of the discrepancy, if there is one, then it is worth looking at, well, has their reaction anything to do with me at all? Or are they just in a bad mood and look for someone to blame? A very funny example is the film High Society. I don't know if you know it. It's a very old film where they come out totally hungover, and there's this old guy and he's standing in front of the house trying to get his head to cooperate. And there's a bird that goes tweet, which is usually a joyful sound. And his reaction is, "Oh, shut up." Well, it's not the bird's fault. Are they maybe projecting their own guilt, their own fears onto me? Have they done something wrong in the past, and because they don't want to think about it, they project that same wrong onto you? Is it jealousy, which may come both from women and men in the same situation, by the way? Has their own ego kicked in, so their own fear and guilt causes them to attack you or misinterpret the situation? Like that woman with the pushback situation. Do they have a benefit from falsely accusing you? For example, get rid of the competition, gain a monetary benefit, or gain status or power? Only then ask what you can do not to trigger those responses in them without compromising your own values or betraying those you care for. To make it clear, this is not a manual for it is always somebody else's fault. If you have done something wrong, even as a reaction to an unjust accusation, then own up to it and make it right. Are your reactions understandable if they were just a reaction? Of course. Are they helpful? No. Why? Because they keep you in a destructive loop with the other people, and you'll probably end up hurting some people who are innocent, just because they belong to that group. The point is that if you have a tendency to feel guilt or not enough, no matter what, and you base your worth on the actions and reactions of other people, you become their slave. And the destructive cycle of guilt, self-defense, and blame is triggered every time someone will accuse you wrongly, which will happen all the time because people have all their own stuff. They are caught up in their own world, their own suffering, and they are looking for someone to blame too. Be it an animal, a tree that sheds leaves, some noisy kids that they could have just as well interpreted as joyful had they been in a better mood and not so hungover, the tweeting bird, or you. If you currently feel attacked, harassed, or bullied by someone or a group of people, I promise you, once you realize that it may not be about you and you have cut the emotional connection between them and you, your perspective will change completely. You may still not look forward to seeing them, but suddenly you can see the pain in them that they are trying to hide and compensate for, and you may even find some compassion for them. Their opinions may still be unpleasant, but it's more like being caught in the rain shower during a picnic, instead of their views taking over your entire world like a deluge or tsunami, sweeping your entire life away. And that means the energy you've been spending trying to keep from drowning, to keep your head above water, and to fend off those trying to drown you and deprive you of your last energy stores because you're constantly busy explaining and defending yourself, is now freed up. Because all you have to do is open an umbrella or go inside. You can then spend all the surplus energy on creating your life the way you want it, or helping others out of the rain, or even throw a life raft to someone still stuck in the deluge. It may also mean you can start defending someone who desperately needs your protection like a pet. If you had already resigned yourself and given up fighting because you know you are not doing something wrong, and you can stop punishing your pet to appease the grumpiness and lack of tolerance of your neighbors. And you have much better chances to find a way to do that without the expectation that you should be punished, because you shouldn't. You are the hero. You are doing the right thing. You're holding the space for those that are different from us and restoring justice to Earth after we, as a species, have been busy taking everything from everyone else for decades. You are making it right. And if possible, you are finding win-win situations for all, and a possibility for the others to enjoy their life too. Because let's face it, if they are always annoyed about that animal coming out, they are missing all the joy that you have found. Wouldn't you want them to share it? Guilt and the feeling not to be good enough doesn't have to take over your world anymore. You can start to create a new world. This is not my wisdom, by the way. There is a very old story that I recently read in Paramhansa Yogananda's book, Biography of a Yogi, which is the story about the wanderer and the tree in paradise. So there's this wanderer, right? And he keeps walking around and suddenly he wanders into paradise and he doesn't really realize it. So he's tired and he sits down under a tree and he's really hungry. So he thinks that he actually really wants to eat. And suddenly everything that he imagined appears in front of him and he can eat and he's eating and it's so good and it's the best food he ever had. And then he thinks, oh, well, I've just eaten. Now I'm actually really thirsty. And he imagines all these things that he wants to drink and they materialize right in front of him and in the best condition. And it tastes so good and it's absolutely beautiful. So now he's eaten and he's drunk. And he's maybe a little bit tipsy at that point because he also imagines some alcohol. And so he's sitting there and his energies are kind of getting lower. And then he suddenly thinks, oh my God, what if I am on somebody else's ground and he comes and tortures me now? And suddenly all these demons show up and they start torturing him. And then suddenly he thinks, oh my God, they may kill me. And they kill him. See, what he didn't understand was that he was sitting under this wishing tree. There's a certain name for it and I can't remember it, but it was a wishing tree. So everything he wished, everything he imagined came true. And that is a wonderful metaphor about exactly this, how we sometimes just by expecting something can make it happen, including the bad stuff. That is the whole law of attraction thing. It doesn't only work for attracting good things, it also works for attracting bad things. So you may not live in paradise yet and you may not be able to control what other people do, but you can at least make sure you don't do anything to influence them in the wrong direction. And you can control how you react to whatever they do and maybe even guide them in a positive direction. Spiritual teachers have taught that for aeons, that pain can sometimes not be avoided, but suffering is a choice. That's what the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism are all about. A victim mentality, however, guarantees suffering. The problem here is that a lot of people who are currently in victim mode will now feel, oh, you're joining the witch hunt, I'm already in pain, and now you're telling me it's my fault. No. If that is what you're thinking, you're not hearing me. I'm not blaming you. I'm giving you a way out. Do you want it? Some people don't. One of the biggest addictions today is the addiction to problems. Why? Because it gives people who have trouble connecting in a positive way, for instance through love, joy, etc., a way to connect in another way. I even catch myself doing it. In England they call it the moaning ritual. You meet somebody, you moan about the weather, you moan about the foreigners, even if you are actually talking to a foreigner without actually realizing it. And that is a way to connect. It is not your fault if you adopted the pattern of victim behavior at some point, and that's all it is. It's a pattern, it isn't you. On a computer, you would call it a program, a piece of programming, which may not even have been installed by you, and it can be deleted. But if you are aware of it now, and you choose to keep it, it becomes your choice. And that alone may turn you from victim to villain, because every victim has a perpetrator, and some of the people you out as perpetrator may not be perpetrators at all. So how do you get rid of it? The questioning strategy above can help identify it, and identify it alone will go a long way to get rid of it. If you clearly decide that this is not something you want in your life anymore and that this isn't you. Some people are less cerebral than me, and they will prefer other methods, such as scrambling in NLP or physical exercise, incantations, or for those of you who do meditation and energy work, you may do a cleansing exercise. The important thing is that you replace it with something positive. Otherwise, you create a void and it fills itself. And that victim program will likely sneakily reinstall itself. That's where the Gurkha method, the first outer strategy, and some of the inner methods of reversing the energy in this course come in. Some of you will notice that while I am drawing my own conclusions, that I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. For instance, I'm using some of the concepts of my mentors. That's not necessarily intentional, but also not surprising, because if you immerse yourself intensely with something, you will also adopt some of the thinking as your own. Plus, they teach these things for a reason. They work, and so they help me. The reason I'm not giving credit here is not to steal the glory for myself. For figuring all this out, I'm solely in their debt. But so that if you or someone else gets upset about this bit of the course, you get upset with me, not with them. These are my conclusions based on their teachings and my own experiences and observations, and they may not share these conclusions. But they sure helped me and took a massive weight off my shoulders. Some ideas are also universal or seem to be around the ether, so to speak. I have written bits in my courses or posts which I know came from me and my unique experiences, and I later found a certain idea in somebody else's course or post. It happens. Sometimes the thought that they may have it from me is a compliment if it's the right person, but of course it may not be the case. And then of course we need to get to the people of section 3. Warlords or power gods and psychopaths. Now, I really don't like this bit, but we kind of have to cover it. So, warlords and power gods aren't necessarily psychopaths. They are two different things. And we should make sure that we don't mix in the people from scenario 1 and scenario 2 into this category, which is really easy to do if you're trying to blame someone yourself. So, make sure that they also don't fall into a different category that I may not be mentioning here, but I'll just shortly cover this. Warlords aren't necessarily psychopaths, but they are people in the early stage of development. Claire Graves has an interesting model, but exploring that goes too far here. We do that later or in one of the other programs, I can't remember. They are the dictators of the world, be it the dictators of countries or in their own homes. Sometimes you find them as rock stars. It's all about them and their power. It's an unpleasant but necessary stage of development as an individual, and sometimes also as a culture, which all of us go through to get to higher stages of development, usually at the age of 2 or 3, I believe. Some people just get stuck there. And if that is the case, that can become very unpleasant, especially if they are physically strong or have a position of power. The other category are psychopaths. They may be mentally highly developed, they just lack the ability to feel positive feelings. And what you see them display is fake. They kind of have to display positive feelings, otherwise they stick out in society and they get punished for it. So they are very good at pretending to have these feelings. And there are more of them around than you think, about 1% of the population, more in certain industries, and not all of them become the proverbial axe murderers. Most don't, actually. Some actually become very good at adapting and selling themselves as what we conventionally call good people. But they will be ruthless if you get in their way. Both should be avoided at all cost. You can fly under the radar or make it clear that attacking you would be more trouble than it would be worth. In a business environment, you can even work together with them if you find a way to align with their interests and give them what they want. But if you have one of them as your neighbor, move. Get help in the meantime if you can. Buy security cameras to have proof if they pull a stunt on you, but they won't change. Just give up on that hope. And the relationship will very likely blow up sooner or later unless you're very, very good in handling them. And then you don't want your animals to be in the crossfire. And you don't want to be exposed to that sort of energy long term, because it will drag you down and it will stunt your development in a way. Moving may be painful. It may offend your senses or your pride to run, so to speak, but you're not just doing it for you. and it will be less painful than staying in the long run. And you may find some really nice people in your next destinations. Just make sure that you don't take them with you in your mind and project them onto the next location. Otherwise, you may actually attract the same kind of people there, or you may end up in a scenario like scenario 2, like this one, where you project something on somebody completely innocent and then cause the situation.
Some people connect through aggression. And sometimes bullies even get more aggressive when they see you hurt, because sometimes they think they are winning, and they want to feel good about themselves. And the more they put you down, the more they think that they are important. But sometimes it's also that if they see you hurt, they actually subconsciously see that they've done something wrong, and they don't want to feel bad about themselves. So they keep getting at you just to keep their own conscience down. Ask for help. Use every legal tool in the book, including outing the bullies if it's absolutely necessary. I don't say outing is the right thing to do, and certainly don't out people who just disagree with you if they give them, their pets some different kind of food, like these people did with the BSPCA, just because they wanted to get the cats out. Because for their own selfish reason. Don't out somebody who loves animals and pretend that they're doing the wrong thing. Or even if it's something else, don't out the wrong people. But if it's the only way to fight back, that is a way to fight back nowadays. Because a lot of times bullies will depend on secrecy. If you take a look, and none of us likes doing that. None of us likes to be the telltale. But think of it, if it was a child, if somebody abuses a child and you find out that they knew about it but never said anything, what do you think about those people? Why should it be different for our pets? Why should it be different for wild animals? The outcome and benefit is if you actually do manage to keep your borders out, even if you don't manage to do the Gurkha strategy. Although I in that apartment, then I put boundaries up to certain people, but to others, then I did the Gurkha strategy and made friends with that neighbor, made friends with the people who own the big property across the street, and went out of myself to help them and help their animals. They've got some chickens and something, and I rescued them from the street and stuff. To again give some benefit before I ask for permission for my animals, even though I do believe that they have the same right to be here as everybody else. Right? So the outcome is you protect yourself and those you love. And the benefit, you don't hate yourself for doing nothing or speaking out too late, like I did with Thunder in the beginning. And you won't feel ashamed of it. And that is something, if you ever had that you spoke out too late and you waited too late because you were afraid, you know how much that can weigh on you. You don't want that. And you don't want that for the animal either. And you don't want that for a child, for that matter. And the action you can take, and visualize standing your ground for 21 days. I wouldn't necessarily, look for situations where you can do it, because you can get one on the nose. I never look for these situations, but it helps to visualize what you would do, how you would react, how would you would react to their arguments, what you would say, so that when that time comes, and it can come, that you visualize a good outcome for starters, because that really helps, because then you look to get to that good outcome if you've been visualizing it the whole time, instead of looking to get to where you fear you may go. So look for the good outcome, visualize something positive, and then also visit us on Facebook. If you research yourself some strategies of nonviolent resistance, for example, you can share them with us on Facebook. A lot of times it helps us if we help others. If you find something interesting, visit us and share it with us. And look at the inner tools later in the course as well.
really hope you found this helpful today. I initially found it difficult to put this particular module together because I don't really like to concentrate on these scenarios, but I do think that the result could really help you. It sure helped me. So now on to the next module.